Today I wanted to show you how I preserve some of my herbs. Now there's more than one way to do this. I'm just going to show you my favorite way. First up is sage. I put a picture here to show you where I clip the sage at, just right above those two little leaves. I'm going to pick a whole handful of sage here. I love to use fresh sage in sausages, and we'll also dry a bunch to add to a sausage mix too. And right next to my sage is oregano. And I'll show you right here where my fingers are is where I clip that. I'm going to grab a whole handful of that and I'm going to trim it kind of around the plant, not all in the same spot, just in case I mess it up. So we're just going to even it out a little bit and give it a good haircut. This is parsley, and I'm just going to clip those off that fell on the ground. I have 3 different types of thyme here: German thyme, lemon thyme, and English thyme, and a big mullein plant there in the middle. So I'm going to clip my thyme, and I have a picture here of where I clip it, just the little limbs off to the side. And I clip around the plant so I don't get all in one spot to stress the plant out. So we're just going to go around and pick some little stems off. And I'm going to grab a sampling of each of the German, lemon, and English thyme. Each one is a little bit different, but I love it all. Thyme happens to be my favorite for sore throats and colds. I make tea out of the fresh leaves, and I love it. And here we go. We're going to go into the house and wash these babies up. Now here we have the basil, and I'm just going to clip it right where my finger is there. And these bushes needed a good haircut, so I'm going to harvest quite a bit. They were growing closely together, and in order for it to grow more, you need to cut it off fairly frequently, and it'll just keep growing more. I don't dry my basil like I do my other herbs, so here in just a minute, I'm going to have a little recipe for you to show you how I use the fresh basil. Now that looks much better, and it'll grow better too. So here it is. I'm just going to lay it out on the table and we'll save it to use for later. And in the meantime, I have washed these herbs and now I'm just going to let them dry for a little bit. And after they've just air dried for a little bit, not too long, I'm going to place them in my dehydrator. Now there are several different ways you can dehydrate herbs. I choose to use this little dehydrator. It's old, it's not fancy, but it does the job. It doesn't even have a temperature setting on it. You just plug it in and it goes. So I do keep an eye on it throughout the day. It takes only a few hours to dry out a handful of herbs. If you do not have a dehydrator, you can use the low setting on your oven to dry out herbs, or you can simply hang them up to dry, and I'll show you how I do that here in a minute too. If you decide to use a dehydrator, just make sure you space the leaves out so the airflow can get around every individual leaf. And mine has several tiers, so I put the sage on the bottom, and here goes the oregano. And like I said, we're just going to leave it on the stems spaced out, and then it'll be easier to get off of the stem when it's dried. And another layer, I'm going to put all of my thyme, spread it out, and I just leave it all on the stem. Then when I'm done spacing it out, I didn't use the top layer of the dehydrator, but I'm just going to put the top on and then put the lid on, and then we plug it in. And that's what it looks like before I've put the lid on to plug it in. And here it is. Very simple. And I'll just keep an eye on it. Okay, now here we have Calendula. My friend gave me these plants, and it has just been wonderful to get so many flowers off of this plant. I just dry these on top of some jars. This is nothing fancy at all. And look how well they've done to dry out. This is red clover and self-heal. I've just dried these on a little cloth napkin. And here's the sage. It's done. You can tell your herbs are done in the dehydrator. They just crumble apart easily. And there's the oregano. It's ready to go. And the thyme. I'm going to let it cool for a little bit. And in the meantime, here's our basil. We're going to make a simple pesto. I don't even know if you could call this a pesto. It doesn't use any pine nuts like a normal pesto recipe would call for. This is simply basil and a drizzle of olive oil. I'm just drizzling it around the top. I'm so sorry, no exact measurements again, but I'm going to put, it looks like 2 or 3 garlic cloves, some salt and pepper. I'm going to blend that up and then add a few spoonfuls of yogurt and blend it up again. And it makes this really fragrant, wonderful green sauce, which I put on top of some chicken. And I just let that cook. And it smelled so good. And we served it with some sweet potatoes with rosemary. And there you go, a way to use your basil. I hung up my parsley, comfrey, and yarrow. Okay, now the herbs have cooled. They're just a little warm after they've been in the dehydrator. So I just let them cool off. And then all we do is just strip off the leaves into a jar. And I'm going to put each individual herb into its own jar, just so I'll know what's what. If you wanted to, you could crush it. You could even leave them on the stem, but I just strip them off of the stem, so if when I need it for cooking, I can just grab it. And the same way with oregano. The leaves just strip so easily off of the stem. There it goes into the jar. And now when you label your jars, if you wanted to make your own Italian seasoning or anything, you can just grab some from the jar and mix it, and there you go, you have it. I can't stress to you how important it is to label your jars. I can't tell you how many times I have told myself, I'll remember what's in this jar. But a year later, I'll find a jar and I'll be wondering what I stored away in the jar. So take my advice, just take a little bit of time and label your jars. It doesn't have to be fancy. And I'll leave the sage in whole leaves because I like to crush it myself when I'm ready to use it in cooking. You could crush it up if you'd like, but I just like to leave them whole. This is last year's oregano and an example of a pretty label. Of course, there's more than one way to preserve herbs, but I just wanted to show you how I like to do it. And it served me well, and dehydrated herbs last the whole year.